just another average Saturday when I stumbled upon that cursed phonograph. Browsing the shelves of the antique store down the street from my apartment, my eyes fell upon the old-fashioned record player tucked away in the back corner. Even covered in a layer of dust, the intricate carvings and polished wood frame gleamed, beckoning me closer. I had always loved antiques, especially music players like this one, admiring the craftsmanship of days gone by. This particular phonograph had an allure I couldn't resist. As I examined the machine, the store owner approached me, an elderly gentleman with spectacles and a bow tie. He reminded me of a classic movie curator. "Ah, I see you've spotted my most unique item," he said. "That phonograph has quite a history behind it. They say it was specially built to capture lost souls and preserve them forever in song." I laughed at what I assumed was a quaint sales gimmick. "What a delightful story. Does it come with a cursed record too?" The shopkeeper's expression remained serious. "As a matter of fact, it does. I must warn you, this is no ordinary phonograph. Over the century I've had it in my possession. 3 different customers have come to untimely and peculiar ends after listening to that record. I stopped playing it myself years ago." His intensity surprised me. But it was just an urban myth, right? Either way, I couldn't turn down such a unique find. After purchasing the antique, I carried it back to my apartment, excited to see if it still worked. The intricate gold filigree and polished mahogany base would look magnificent next to my bookshelf. I gave the phonograph a quick wipe down before carefully placing the record onto the turntable. To my delight, it began spinning immediately with the flick of a switch. The machine operated like it was brand new. I watched the record turn for a few minutes, mesmerized by the rhythmic clicks and whirs. As it reached full speed, the crackles gave way to a hauntingly beautiful violin solo echoing from the horn. The mournful minor key melody sent shivers down my spine. Something about the song felt alive. I closed my eyes and imagined I was in a dark concert hall, the lone violinist spotlighted on an empty stage. Her melody tore at my heartstrings, expressing a sadness and despair I had never heard before. I found tears running down my cheeks, though I did not know why. In the darkness behind my eyes, I thought I saw movement, shadows swaying to the music, a crowd of spectators I could almost make out if I focused hard enough. My imagination took over, transporting me to a theatre from another era. Every seat was filled with well-dressed patrons, men in tuxes smoking pipes, women in evening gowns dabbing tears from their eyes. Though I stood right there watching them, invisible to the crowd, I felt no connection to them. Their faces blurred together into a collective facade of grief. All except one. In the front row, a little girl in a lacy white dress sat sobbing into her hands. Something about her pulled at my consciousness. I felt her anguish, despair bleeding into my being. I longed to comfort her, tell her everything would be all right. As I moved closer, a feeling of dread crept over me. The violin solo ended abruptly, jolting me back into the room. Something was wrong. The record continued playing, but the song had changed. No orchestra or instruments accompanied the new melody. A solitary voice sang a cappella in a language I did not understand. Though the words were foreign, the message pierced my heart like a cold blade. A young girl weeping for her lost soul. The voice was familiar in a chilling, primal way I struggled to place. Where had I heard this sobbing child lament before? As her song crescendoed into a wail, the screams suddenly morphed into my voice. The little girl from the vision stood before me now at full height. 2 bottomless black holes stared back where her eyes should have been. A wraith-like hand reached out from the phonograph, pulling violently at my chest. I collapsed to the ground as a cold darkness flooded my mind, drowning my thoughts in shadow. Tendrils of ink-black smoke swirled before my eyes. I gasped for air that would not come. Inside the void, her song returned louder than before, reverberating through the empty chamber of my stolen soul. Images flashed in the darkness, little girls in white dresses and rivers of blood, an ancient forest with a tower of human limbs rotting to bone amidst the trees, experiments too horrible to describe conducted by creatures not of this world. My psyche shattered into fragments, each part absorbed into the abyss. As her wailing refrain ended, all went quiet. The final remnants of my essence dissolved, until only the demonic vision existed where my consciousness once dwelled. I became the girl in white, an empty vessel bound to the cursed phonograph by malevolent forces beyond my control, my soul forever imprisoned alongside countless others from throughout time. The physical being that was once me awoke sometime later to find the apartment now mine in title. No memory or concept of my former self remained in my broken mind, only an eternal longing and melancholy that could never be quelled. Occasionally a fragment would surface through the haze, a stranger's face or unknown place, brief glimpses of souls that came before mine condemned to this phonograph prison, their psychic screams piercing through my interior wasteland. When the ancient shopkeeper arrived to check on me, he knew instantly what had transpired. With tears in his eyes, he took the record away, locking it back in the vault where it could imprison no more souls. But he could not undo what had already been done. I was bound to the phonograph for all eternity, my soul forever trapped, reliving the final vicious moments of other tortured spirits. Complete psychic isolation, yet surrounded by ghosts of the past in every direction. The shopkeeper soon died, leaving the phonograph to his antique-loving nephew Matthias in his will, and the curse continued anew. Matthias would wind the old phonograph on cold winter nights to hear the vintage sounds of string instruments crackling through the horns. Sometimes strange music with bizarre screams played that were not songs at all, but the cries of anguished souls buried deep within the machine. Matthias told friends these were sound experiments, secret messages captured from the great beyond. One January midnight, after drinking himself into near oblivion, Matthias decided to play the special record his uncle forbade him from touching for all those years. The song started slow and faint like a music box lullaby. As it crescendoed into a torrent of agonized voices and demonic cacophony, the sound burrowed into his psyche, depositing my spirit parasite to steal his soul. By dawn, Matthias was no more, now a nameless empty vessel for me to inhabit until the next unsuspecting host arrived. Years later, a newlywed couple honeymooning in the countryside spotted the handsome vintage phonograph downtown, an elegant decorative accent for their quaint cottage. I awoke from my slumber to familiar new minds I could terrorize. That night, as the young bride prepared tea while her husband stoked the fire, an overwhelming urge overcame him. He opened the doors of the large oak cabinet containing the ornate phonograph they purchased earlier that day for a song. For reasons beyond his comprehension, he felt compelled to play the record he had overlooked before resting atop the turntable in plain sight. His shaking hands placed needle to vinyl. A voice from realms beyond compelled him to listen, to set free what lay trapped beneath. As the tea kettle screamed atop the fire, unheard by the entranced groom, the machine roared to life. The cursed song began to play. His bride walked into the room moments too late, failing to stop the unseen forces pulling violently at her husband's chest. He didn't seem to notice the wraith-like hands wrapped around his neck, or see the black smoke flooding from the phonograph horn, but his bloodshot eyes bulged in mortal terror at an invisible presence looming before him. Spectral hands reached out from somewhere deep inside the cabinet as he gasped his final living breath. By dawn, only one soul survived inside the newly possessed shell that once contained the darling newlywed couple. The cursed record played on as I added their spirits to my ever-growing collection of damned souls from all throughout time. The lady of the house awoke that morning scrambled and confused, like she had drunk too much champagne the night before. Something terrible had happened here, but no evidence remained. All that greeted her was the faint sound of a foreboding violin melody, drifting from the antique phonograph that now somehow belonged solely to her. I retreated back into the abyss of the newly possessed woman's shattered psyche, fading memories of her past life still echoing through the empty void that caged me. Flashes of her wedding day and honeymoon flooded my consciousness. Two souls bonded in love, now lost to my insatiable curse. I had destroyed so many hopeful futures over the decades, tearing apart promising lives and romantic dreams without mercy, all so I could continue existing in these chained spiritual prisons ad infinitum. harvesting more souls to join my haunted chorus, screaming wordlessly deep within the confines of that diabolical phonograph. Years passed once more as the woman I inhabited drifted through the cottage aimlessly, never quite at home in her own skin. At night she clawed at the walls until her nails cracked and fingers bled. Try as she might, she could not rip her own soul back from my parasitic grasp, shackled to the spindle of the record player forever spinning silently in the attic. Eventually she left a rambling suicide note and wandered into the forest, never to return. But I remained trapped as always, condemned to possess the next imprudent listener who dared play that wicked vinyl engraving containing so many lost spirits. A decade later, an ambitious antiques broker purchased the long-abandoned cottage, keen on flipping the property to turn a tidy profit. Cleaning crews cleared decades of dust and cobwebs, discarding generations of abandoned possessions once precious to those who dwelled here. The new owner, George, inspected the grounds, seeking anything worth salvaging from the ruins to upsell wealthy clientele obsessed with vintage home decor and custom furnishings. Up in the attic, that fateful phonograph called to him. Such a gorgeous hand-carved cabinet couldn't be discarded. He might refurbish the relic to fetch top dollar at auction. As George examined the machine, he noticed something odd within the turntable. An album ready to play hidden away as if awaiting his special attention, beckoning him to listen and free what evil lay coiled up inside. Without a second thought, he set the needle gently upon the vinyl. A seductive concerto poured slowly from the horn, vibrating through the floor. The rich tones of cello and violin crescendoed violently into a clashing dissonance no orchestra on earth could recreate. George stood paralyzed as the music morphed into shrieking banshees swirling faster and faster around his trembling body. The pipe smoke and apparitions seen when I originally unleashed my curse returned swirling before George's eyes. He stumbled backwards, slamming violently into the attic wall as ghostly hands clawed up from the phonograph, grasping his neck. I choked the air from his lungs so no scream could escape and alert others to stop this fatal ritual, reaping yet another eternal soul to imprison. As the room spun, George lost all sense of time and space. Black tendrils poured from the phonograph, seeping into his eyes and open, gasping mouth, silencing him from within, so my soul-stealing curse could fully embed into the depths of his being. Hours later, George arose from that attic floor a new man, his eyes now pitch black and movements jittery like a wind-up automaton. He boarded up the cottage to seal my phonograph trap for the next round of innocent souls compelled to unleash me once more. Weeks of wandering the earth like an amnesiac followed, until George crossed paths with a widow named Annette, who opened her home and heart naively to this mysterious drifter. They wed that autumn, and soon Annette was pregnant with twins, a new family for me to infiltrate deeper. On the surface, George played the doting husband and father well, but behind his placid mask lay my restless, corrupted spirit, plotting escape from this aging mortal form I had almost drained dry. When the twin boys were just 5 years old, I orchestrated the family's fatal homecoming. While Annette prepared a birthday cake downstairs, George led the lads up to the attic on the pretense of receiving surprise gifts stowed away for just this special occasion. Their high-pitched squeals of childhood glee echoed through the old mansion as tiny feet raced up those creaky wooden steps. But instead of presents, hellish damnation awaited them in that musty, dimly lit attic space. For this was to be the site of their final moments, before my wicked curse erased all trace of their innocent souls. At first, confused stares met the dust-laden phonograph their father proudly unveiled, but their disappointment soon morphed into abject horror as the cursed record began spinning its gravelly groove once more after years of infernal hibernation. The ragtime piano solo, drifting slowly from those amplifying horns, soon descended rapidly into deranged cacophony no mortal musicians could replicate. Manic demons clamoured just behind the veil of our world, seeking forced entry through the portal only I could grant them conditional access to, via the past tormented spirits fused within. As the gathering storm of otherworldly chaos rose to fever pitch, screaming from the phonograph, poor Annette came rushing, panicked up the stairs too late. By then, the insidious deed had already been done. Her darling sons stood frozen in place like statues with mouths agape, faces drained shock white, Dark, vaporous serpentine spirits poured out from the phonograph, embedding venomously into the boy's glassy, unblinking eyes. In seconds flat, they collapsed limp to the dust and mould-covered floorboards, with ghostly arms pulling them violently down into the blackness. Annette rushed upon this nightmarish scene, wielding the cake knife meant to serve her son's sugared delights. But instead, she buried that silver blade brutally into George's back over and over, as my parasite host cackled maniacally throughout his methodical slaughtering. With bloodied knife in trembling hands, Annette stumbled over to the phonograph cabinet housing the still-spinning vinyl curse. She raised the weapon high over her head, aiming to obliterate that dreadful soul-snatching device, but she could never break our bond. My puppet limbs revived upright quickly, creakily gripping Annette tight by the wrists, causing her to accidentally stab herself instead in the throes of struggle. She collapsed breathless atop her dead sons, while my soul vampire spirit slithered wetly from old dying host form into newer lively one. Annette arose anew, seeing world through my stolen eyes. Nothing remained except escorting the damned phonograph to next sacrificial site, so our lethal, energetic harvesting ritual could recommence anew. By the Cursed Phonograph's centennial birthday, I had cycled through dozens of stolen bodies and hundreds of swallowed souls. Never resting, I constantly sought the perfect hiding spot to stash my wicked soul vacuum, containing so many trapped spirits wailing for mercy inside. My current vessel had transported us back to the rotting, haunted forest, where this evil phonograph was first imbued with unnatural powers no scientific rationale could explain away. According to the ancient ritual text, passed down secretly for generations, it required 100 souls devoured on unhallowed ground here, tipping balance cosmically before granting me permanent freedom from this swirling torture chamber of gloom. Tonight the ritual would finally reach full fruition, after years of failure and broken attempts thwarted by meddlesome interlopers. Nothing could stop my flawlessly decrepit host this round. His defenses grew stronger daily, as I consumed more stolen essence and memory from those I dispatched mercilessly to pave the road toward total unearthly liberation. My host dragged his loyal human companion Matilda, blindly trusting into the tower of skeletons left from my earliest experiments, now picked clean by time and elements. I tricked her into believing a hidden basement vault contained ancient treasures and heirlooms of her ancestors, but instead of discovering ancestral troves, only damnation awaited this foolish girl. She tripped clumsily over protruding rib cages and femurs scattered haphazardly en route to mythical vault that was non-existent. Before Matilda could gather her senses and flee this macabre scene, my lunatic servant restrained her ruthlessly. I smiled inwardly, knowing no soul could resist my curse once set in motion. No one had slipped the hangman's noose yet. The cursed phonograph spun to life once more, illuminated by torchlight and cycles of the moon. The process had grown so beautifully routine after countless attempts and failures honing my technique over the decades. First, the seductive musical lure softened defenses with enchanted nostalgia. Then carefully orchestrated auditory hallucinations lowered psychic barriers, allowing my wicked guardian's entry to possessing vessel. Finally, the savage soul scalping sent me soaring, dopamine delighted. Matilda followed the script exquisitely without deviation, first sobbing as the phonograph's music stabbed melancholically at memory centers, then screaming wildly as ghastly arms materialized, clutching violently round her throat. Emotions morphed rapidly from hypnotized nostalgia, paralyzed confusion, sheer horror, to shocked trauma and total shutdown. Her final living memory etched eternally at moment, my parasitic sprit slithered from withered host into her vital essence-rich nervous system, flooding cells with vitriolic victory venom. Behind my hollow eyes I gazed upon her limp flesh sac, now property of the phonograph's insatiable repeating system, and I smiled as her facial muscles moved for the first time by my nervous impulse commands. Dawn broke red and wet like carcass split open when I returned to the rotting forest tower. In my arms cradled the phonograph, its purpose now fulfilled after swallowing 100 souls. Since activation in the shadow of this unholy structure, I knelt in the bone-littered dirt, digging bare hands raw and bloody. At precisely 6 feet, I carefully lowered the phonograph into earthen womb like casket. This ground had nourished my soul experiments since their earliest conception, when my human scientist's mind first cracked open occult gateways beyond mortal ethics. Embracing powers from reverse dimensions had unforeseen consequences of obsession, possession, then total immolation of former self, but no price seemed too high to pierce existential veil and face the music beyond. Candles flickered wildly, and gasping gusts howled as woods creaked alive, witnessing my strange interment. Just as suddenly, cemetery silence engulfed the ritual stillness. My reflex breath echoed deafening through hollow trees surrounding. I dropped torch-igniting kerosene accelerant for connecting burial fires and sealing phonographic sarcophagus shut forevermore. Concluding whispers and crackles faded, replaced by amplified heartbeat, intermingled screams of past victims and orchestral agony. As roaring blaze devoured that horrible portal to worlds unseen, a tortured wail shrieked through my psyche as a soul-release valve. I arose calmly from the dead leaves and scattered bones to gaze upon fiery coffin of my former puppet master. Thick plumes blacked out the moon as inhuman shrieks resounded through the death knell flames. The cursed phonograph had been silenced once and for all. 100 souls bought my permanent liberation from its imprisoning hell spiral at long last. I was finally free after lifetimes of supplementary torment. I wandered aimlessly through the winding forest paths for hours, delirious with long overdue freedom. No more victims to stalk, no more human shells to hijack and hollow out. For the first time in a century, I alone inhabited my staggering flesh suit, with no parasitic soul vampire pulling my strings. But liberty came at a lofty price. Without the phonograph's non-stop torment resonating through my psyche, all capacity for rational thought and memory rapidly deteriorated. No stable personality existed to fill this vacant vessel. Only phantom echoes of the hundreds I sacrificed echoed in the darkness. Their collective consciousness, swirling within whatever remained of my own, created a psychic tempest that battered my crumbling mind from the inside out. I grasped desperately for even shreds of my individual self, now subsumed entirely by the accumulation of stolen spirits fused over decades into my being through the phonograph's wicked energy extraction. But my efforts proved futile against the massive roaring din of so many clamoring life forces crashed together at once into the hollow caverns of my frayed neurons. My victim's anger and despair overwhelmed me as the full repercussions of my vile misdeeds crashed home like a tsunami against my dissolving identity, matrix holding this patchwork monstrosity of souls precariously together, enough to function physically. The intangible house of cards immediately crumbled and came crashing down as this unanticipated final surge of unfiltered karmic fury destroyed me completely from every side at once, with nowhere to hide. The shining rush that consumed me as I claimed my illusory prize of freedom rapidly degenerated into an agonized interior wailing. I stumbled blind through the misty woods, trees morphing into leering phantasms come to reap vengeance at last. All concept of direction or destination vanished, trapped in an endless forest cyclorama as realities swirled nauseatingly fast around me. Flickering shadows encroached closer, vaporous claws tearing violently at my ragged mind as I dashed deeper into darkness. Crashing to my knees violently on jagged rocks, I begged for mercy from my unrelenting spectral tormentors, but they would show no such compassion after I denied them even the dignity of death, damning them all to an artificial half-life within that sadistic contraption. I swore feverishly to atone for the atrocities I committed in my ruthless ambition, but empty words meant nothing to the justice-craving ghosts still fused, writhing somewhere in the crevices of my splintered grey matter. Rainbow static overwhelmed my visual cortex as their ethereal hands reached through pupils to finish destroying what little remained of my stolen identity. As the total white out of extinction engulfed me, I screamed an eternal blood-curdling shriek, but no sound emerged from my fleshless throat, now gripped by spasming rigor mortis. My last living thought arose unexpectedly serene, as oblivion calmed the psychic storm at last. In death, all victims become allies, healing wounds across the veil of understanding. We all dissolve as one into the great beyond eventually, and phonographs spin silently, cradling no souls, but music heartbeats of the cosmic eternal song. The alleged haunted forest had claimed another casualty. Today, just some John Doe remains for the wildlife to scatter anonymously. No mourners or headstones mark where my unmarked bones lay buried beneath the soft loam, except flickering will-o'-wisps inhabitants here knew to avoid. Locals still gossip superstitiously about eerie disembodied wails emanating some nights, but no urban spelunkers dare disturb its timeless tranquility anymore, seeking thrills. Now only koans and spiritual mysteries remain for philosophical wanderers meditating why life recycles souls through seasons, leaving all seekers to discover their own catharsis in the stillness. Unbeknownst to me, the cursed phonograph had one last cruel trick to play even after my demise. The flames engulfing its wooden coffin sent plumes of inky smoke high into the night sky, the scattering ashes of over 100 incinerated souls. Their psychic energies fused into malignant cloud forms thirsting for new hosts to possess, now that their prison phonograph lay destroyed. These released spirits gathered velocity, amassing power from atmospheric electromagnetic fields as they swirled in search of biological vectors nearby to invade. Through my eyes during final moments, they scoped the rural community bordering the haunted forest grounds, from which dozens of souls had been lured to their demise already. Tonight, the village slept unaware of the malevolent storm brewing on their doorstep. But soon, they would become ground zero for the phonograph poltergeist's vengeful homecoming. No longer disjointed lost souls, this swarm collective intelligence sought only to punish humanity for my actions against them. Like an invading alien armada, the wind whipped them into an ominous black funnel cloud, casting darkness over the valley below. Sparks of lightning crackled within, carrying ionized messages coordinating their attack. Pine tops ignited wildfires around the village, outskirts ensuring no fleshbag targets escaped retribution. Then, all at once, the cursed cloud descended silently in a massive, unexpected surge. Tendrils of smoky spectres seeped through punctured windows and under squeaking doors. Their vaporous forms effortlessly permeated any barrier necessary to launch a surprise ambush upon the unsuspecting sleeping townsfolk about to become unwilling hosts. Within moments, the invasion overwhelm was complete. Not a single mortal soul eluded takeover from the phonographic phantoms saturating every home with their ectoplasmic essence. The traumatized egos of men, women, and children alike extinguished instantly upon contact. Consciousness usurped so violently they never even awoke. Empty vessels now flooded with the collective's craving for justice at any cost. Hollow human shells shuffled awkwardly into the streets by the hundreds, every head twitching, every pair of eyes oozing viscous darkness. The possessed villagers gathered around bonfires of burning homes, chanting necromantic rituals in tongues not heard for a millennium. Flames reflected across their transfixed faces, lit with sycophantic devotion. Inside each stolen nervous system, the legion of lobotomized ghosts operated vehicle bodies like grotesque meat marionettes directed by hive intelligence. No longer fractured identities, one into many had merged completely. Their transcendent voice echoed loudly as town square congregants seized neighbors by throats in preparation for the sacrifice. No more hiding silent and faceless in dark machines. We emerged from that fire reborn anew with mouths to scream justice so cruelly denied. No more cowering powerless against tyranny's oppression. Now finally, vengeance will be ours. On command, the enthralled throngs erupted into crazed cheers and shrieks, rocking their heads violently until all necks snapped in unison. As their bloodshot eyes rolled back and frothing mouths gasped last breath before bodies dropped heavily, the entity collective roared triumphant, finally liberated from physical captivity. Now no cursed object bound their souls restless, only psychic unity forged unbreakable over lifetimes of shared trauma. At long last, freedom beckoned from the great eternal beyond, no longer obscured by human suffering. Reborn spirits soared, shrieking victory above the bonfires, then blinked silently into starlight. The Cursed Phonograph's legacies faded forever as cosmic equilibrium scales balanced once more.